Hello there! In this video, I'm going to slowly guide you through this entire unit. It's actually a re-upload of a live stream that I made in the run-up to the 2025 exams. But you can follow along with me as I spend a few hours filling in this A3 poster. As it's a live stream, I respond to questions given to me by hundreds of real students as they prepare for their exams. I have 7 of these live streams that I've re-uploaded, and over the course of this year, I'm going to host the remaining live streams. And re-record the old ones so you've got a chance to take part. If you want to join me, then please subscribe so you get notified when I announce one of these live streams. It would also be great if you could subscribe because I just hit 94,000 subscribers. So pretty close to that 100k milestone. So if you're finding my stuff useful and want a free way to help out the channel, that would be amazing. Now, I don't do sponsorships for things like VPNs, but the other things I make are entirely focused on helping you get the best out of your A-level. And selling all these things helps me make the free content on YouTube. You can get this poster and posters for every unit, both completed and filled in as digital files and now as a revision book. You could also follow along with each of my main videos with worksheets. These are designed to give you an active role and make the information sticky. I also have an app for you to test yourself, and I let you use all the paper 1 for free without ads before you decide if it's worth unlocking papers 2 and 3. Altogether, it's thousands of pre-made quiz questions and flashcards. And I have over 17 hours of exam question walkthroughs, as well as lots of other resources over on Patreon. And starting now, I'm going to be doing an exam question focused live stream most weeks that are exclusive to my Patreon supporters. Thank you for listening to all of that. Let's get started with the start of psychology. So I just want some knowledge about what Wundt did. Just give me some AO1s on Wundt. I'm not going to spend long on Wundt. Yeah, Wundt's the person we want. Got introspection. Created the first lab. Father of psychology. Maybe you could argue the father of experimental psychology. First person to make psychology a science, I would say. And through the use of experimental psychology. Leipzig, I didn't have quite enough space for the location, but Leipzig is correct. In the 1870s. Ticking metronome, scientific methods, all good stuff. Structuralism for me, the first one to say that. I've seen it in the Marxian. Don't worry if you haven't heard the term structuralism. That's fine. So father of experimental psychology would probably say first lab in 1870s, first psychology journal as well, but didn't have quite space for that. But we're trying to make it's Wundt's kind of role in the development of psychology as a science. So you kind of have to think a little bit like what came before. The mind was studied, the brain was studied, but in the context of philosophy and medicine. So the difference between philosophy and medicine is in philosophy, you would consider what the mind might be through logical argument. And in medicine, you would have case studies where you'd find some interesting things out about someone. But the point of Wundt is this controlled experimentation to use multiple healthy participants and try to find patterns. So a couple of you have mentioned structuralism. Before that, I do that though, I would like you to type out the stages. Come up a few times, like the stages of introspection. What would you put down about the stages of introspection? Can you say did a paradigm shift? Yeah, I guess maybe like was the first paradigm shift, arguably, away from a medical perspective and into a scientific perspective. I'm not saying like medicine is unscientific, but generally, like if you're just doing case studies as a doctor, it's not controlled experimentation. Okay, as participants note down the experience to a stimulus. Yeah, Evie coming in with a real, and Gracie coming in as well with a really important point. These participants were trained. Now, these days, we probably wouldn't want to train a participant because we want naturalistic behavior, but it does kind of make sense that he was asking people to do something a little difficult. So training them was kind of important for this introspection. And then, yeah, we got stimulus. A couple of people talking about a metronome. Interesting point about a metronome. A lot of people say that Pavlov used a bell. That's incorrect. It was a mistranslation from the Russian. He used a metronome and a buzzer, like an electronic buzzer. Him ringing a bell with his own hands would have been too random. It wouldn't have been able to control the stimulus as he needed. Pavlov was a proper old school biological Well, he's a biologist more than not a psychologist. So yeah, just a random point. So I think we've got some good stuff here. So as part of his structuralist approach, he used introspection. Participants focused inwards on sensations. That's kind of the bullet point of what introspection is. Participants focusing inwards on sensations. Yeah, some of you there, they're giving me a definition of what structuralism is. We're trying to break things down to their basic elements so we can see there's an overall structure to them. So yeah, 1, we trained to report conscious experiences. 2, focus on a stimulus, and those you put metronome. Good. 3, systematically report. So they were trained not necessarily just to say anything. They were meant to be able to reflect on particular sensations and emotions. And then importantly from these introspections, people were able to develop general theories. What do I mean by inwards? So let's say I get you to watch a horror movie. You could probably reflect on your internal experiences and say, I was very scared. So it's something that is, something that is internal to you. Other people can't see, so you have to judge on your own perspective. Okay. Let's go. Some quick evaluations, everyone. Throw me some evaluations. I've already put a couple down here, but you probably might have some more than me. Obviously, we'd expect if Start Psychology came up with an essay to be quite a short one. But there's some terms mentioned explicitly. Not falsifiable is a good one, and inferences is a good one. Subjective self-report. Cannot observe directly the mind, so inferences have to be made, which can be incorrect. All of that's well written. Fwomp's good with first use of standardized procedures that can be replicated, led to development of psychology as a science. Brilliantly put. Okay, my ones briefly put down. Highly scientific. There's interesting. We're going to make a little bit of an answer here with Start Psychology and Wundt. For his time, he was highly scientific because he's the first person doing it, really. Lots of people, as you know, came afterwards with criticisms due to controlled experiments. I probably could have put replication in there as well, actually, as some of you have mentioned. That would be a good term to put in there. Or criticism, when we can link this to behaviorism, behaviorists who came next highly criticized introspection as too subjective for research. So we'll take that. And then potentially researcher bias, maybe linked to the interpretation of inferences. But I put that as potentially a good thing. As someone mentioned, led to still used by cognitive psychologists. Inferences were abandoned for a while. Behaviorists was very, very dominant in psychology for a long period of time, but eventually people realized we actually cannot ignore the fact that we have internal mental processes, because it's kind of obvious we do. So it was brought back by cognitive psychologists, but in a different way. No training participants at this point, and generally not just trusting what people say, but testing their limits of their abilities. It's pretty hard to fake that you can recall 50 items. So, no one's faking the short-term memory store. They'll be mistaken in our assumptions about what it means, but yeah, they're a little bit more careful about it. Yeah, I am definitely going to try and do it by Psychology Live. I can't guarantee when it'll be. If I can get the poster done tomorrow, I will get it done 7 p.m. If I don't, it will be I'll work all night and then I'll get out in the morning of the 20th. Yeah, so I'm going to be using IMPs throughout this poster for internal mental processes, because otherwise it would never fit on this poster, because the number of times we need to talk about it is a lot. So yeah, there's our abbreviation. Learning approaches. Okay, so what are the 2 learning approaches? If you're asked an essay about learning approaches, what are they going to be? Kara, I won't be covering comparisons in this. It's kind of implicit in the evaluations and also just time-wise and space-wise. Boom. Wow. I think literally 295 people all just typed behaviors in the social learning theory. Very good. Sometimes it's the weirdest mistakes, People in the moment just don't realize it says learning approaches. You can talk about both of them. So But yeah, the fundamental principle between both the learning approaches is behaviors learned through experience and interactions with the environment. Social learning theory and behaviorism both agree with that overall point. So we can see something there that connects them, even though there's a lot that disconnects them. So our first section is going to be on what is behaviors. No, I'm going to reveal this because it's just fine. So behaviorists will start off with can only scientifically study what's directly observable, measurable, and they assume the mind is a black box. So there's a counter to the stuff that came before it and the cognitive stuff that comes after it. Let's do a little bit of a deep dive, guys, and try and put in some of the terminology for me for classical conditioning. What is classical conditioning? Learning by association. Again, I'll break it down. What's the process then? I've definitely got learning by association. Mm-hmm. So we got Anna there. Learning by association. So a neutral stimulus can produce a conditioned response. I'm going to tighten that up a little bit. Neutral stimulus becomes something and then produces a conditioned response, but it's a good start. Arushi, positive reinforcement isn't part of classical conditioning, unfortunately. Okay, Alina, they have a nice little formula. Okay, so I'm trying to write this in as few words as possible, but the concept behind classical condition, which I think a few of you have done particularly well, especially with the formulas that you've put in. Classical conditioning, learning by association. You basically all gave me that in one go. So what have we got there? We've got a neutral stimulus is associated with an unconditioned stimulus by repeated pairings. So I've written this in a really short outline. A neutral stimulus is associated with an unconditioned stimulus via repeated pairings. The neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus, and that equals a conditioned response, even when there is no unconditioned stimulus. So yeah, in a sentence, which is hard to do, there's a brief classical conditioning. Let's now link that to Pavlov's research. So you might just want to put what the neutral stimulus was, or the conditioned stimulus was, or the unconditioned stimulus was. Give me some bits of Pavlov. We're kind of repeating that a little bit, but putting in Pavlov's actual study. So give me a little bit of Pavlov. The neutral stimulus of the metronome. Good, Charlie. Salivation. Okay. Food is the unconditioned stimulus, yes. Elicits unconditioned response of salivation from N. Yeah, the mark scheme will be fine with bell or metronome. Don't worry about it. Yeah, you definitely won't use marks in the exam for using bell. It's a very, very common misunderstanding. At A level, no one's going to care. Okay. I just wait my one. Here we go for Pavlov. You guys have got all of those bits as a team. So we've got Pavlov's research, presented dogs with food, which is an unconditioned stimulus. Their response, what they do, is drooling, an unconditioned response. That's how I'll start off. And then a metronome as a neutral stimulus was presented at the same time, obviously multiple times to build that association. This, the metronome, became a conditioned stimulus, producing drool, a conditioned response, even without the food present. No thump. Okay. We're good. Okay, so now let's go on to, of course, operant conditioning. Please tell me what operant conditioning is, and give me a little bit more detail. What the terminologies I would hope to see here. Learning through reinforcement's good. Yeah, learning through consequence. Okay. Abigail's got a really good question there. I'm going to just jump in it like now. Would use Pavlov as A1 or A3 as an essay for behaviorist approach to classical conditioning? Right. I'm going to cover this more as social learning theory, actually. Hold to that, because I think it'll make more sense when I talk about social learning theory about what we're after with particular questions, but do hold on that. JS says learning by observation, imitation of a role model. No, not yet. Hold that. Okay, and some of you jump into Skinner's research a little bit soon as well. So what this is, I need to hide this, otherwise I'll reveal real Pavlov as well, Skinner as well. Just fix the slide. He'll be back. Here we go. All right. Operant conditioning, learning by reinforcement. This is a voluntary response. You want to talk about a difference between classical conditioning and operant conditioning? We just think like the rats in Skinner's research choose all of their behaviors. It's learning through voluntary behavior. So learning by reinforcement, voluntary response produces consequences. Now, these consequences of these voluntary responses can be reinforcing, making behavior more likely, or punishing, making behavior less likely frequently. Okay, May, if I make another mistake, I'll put the technical error slide on it. It's funny. So there's, in a few words, what we've got. Now, keep in mind, we have got positive and negative as well, but we'll go into that in a second. Okay, give me some points about Skinner. So try and summarize Skinner as much as we can. Yeah, replay this will be on for probably 24 hours. Maybe more. Until the biopsych one's up. Not for behaviorism. So Charlie said, observed how rats would operate levers to receive reward, food, or avoid punishment, electric shock. That's great. We can add some terminology there. Food is positive reinforcement. I wouldn't say the lever is negative reinforcement, Lily. Okay. We're good there. We've got both the shock and we have got the food. And I'll just reveal this extra bit as well. So, Skinner's research, rats in Skinner boxes. When a lever was pressed, food was released. So then we got positive reinforcing. That's positively reinforcing. Lever pulling, reinforcing lever pulling behavior. When the lever stopped shocking, the cage, lever pulling was negative reinforced. So just a little summary about the setup there of Skinner's research. And I have slipped in the extra concept there that some of you popped in there, which is extinction. If the reinforcing consequences stop, so will behavior. So if they're pressing the lever and the food stops coming out, the lever will press a few more times, but eventually it would stop completely. Okay. Good work, everyone. Good work. Thanks for the help with that. Let's go on to social learning theory. Everyone's going social learning theory. So I would like you to say how, before we get into the details of all the key terms, like fundamentally, what are social learning theorists doing? Like, do they agree with behaviorism? Do they not agree with behaviorism? Why? What's going on? We'll do evaluations like separately. I'll do evaluations for behaviorists and social learning theorists once I've done all the AL1. So Arushi's really nicely phrased there, bridging between the cognitive and behaviorist approach. Why? Okay, Mayer's good. Learning doesn't have to be direct. from like behaviorism, we can learn from watching the consequences of others. We'll definitely go into that. Okay, nice. I will reveal that. Combine behaviorist ideas. So, they do agree with behaviorism fundamentally. But it just seems silly to completely ignore the role of internal mental processes. So we'll go into those. First up, what are the internal mental processes? Okay, Chloe getting in there nice and fast. There's a point I want to make about these, which people often get wrong. So hopefully I can help you. Oh. Actually, no, I'll just let you to read those out for me. Okay, somebody also defined for me vicarious reinforcement. We've got the mediational processes. I'll talk you through all of them when I've got them. What is vicarious reinforcement? Give me a definition. But learning by observation of others, it gives them a little bit more than that. So yeah, mediational processes we're good with. So Jojo, they're coming in with watching someone get rewarded for a behavior, watching someone else being reinforced and learning how to behave because of consequences of others. So I like Nathaniel Madison's definition. When we see someone rewarded for a behavior, we're more likely to imitate it. Okay. You might also want to just add to the end of that because we want the reward ourselves. I haven't fitted out my poster myself, but it's important to point out there is a motivational element there. Okay. What is the term? There's a few terms, guys, that in this area we're going to want to kind of be clear on. We don't want to use the word copy. We want to use the word imitation. So modeling is an important one as well to use correctly. What is modeling? Are the mediational processes considered cognitive processes? Yes, they certainly are. I'll explain why in a second. Yeah, imitating the behavioral role model. People we look up to. Well, let's get straight into that then. People we look up to. Can people give me a definition of identification as well? Identification. And then I'll go through everything I've spoken about so far. So Eli with similar characteristics to us. Older people, friends, relatives, etc. Lucy Crops. And there's probably one more point, but I don't know if I've seen it. I'm sorry if I've missed it because the chat's gone pretty fast. It's not just that I like us. It literally goes with your higher class. I'll take that. So let me go through all of these points in one go. So first of all, mediational processes, why are they a cognitive process? Because they happen all in the mind. So we have a stimulus response. Now, behaviorists would just say that's all you can see. Stimulus, response, just ignore anything that goes in between it. But clearly something must happen in the mind between seeing a stimulus, which would be, maybe seeing a behavior modeled and deciding to do it ourselves or physically doing it ourselves. So what are they? Well, if we didn't pay attention, then we're not going to repeat it because we just didn't really see it properly. If we forget what we've seen, then we're not going to repeat. So the retention must be something that happens in the mind. Reproduction is a tricky one. Reproduction is the one that you're most likely to get wrong in an essay. So let's keep this in mind. Reproduction is thinking if you can do it. So tempted to say repeating it because it does sound like that. But reproduction is a cognitive process. It happens in the mind. If you say it's them doing it, you are definitely wrong. It's thinking whether we can do it. So yeah, if you think you can't do a behavior, even though you really can, you just won't try. So I can't do that, but you might be able to do it. And then finally, with motivation. Well, we're gonna want to do something, or we ain't gonna do it. There must be a reason to do it. So all of these are things that happen in the mind. These are internal mental processes. Vicarious reinforcement. Yeah, the important element, we see someone being rewarded for their behavior. We want to imitate that behavior because fundamentally we want the same reward. We're assuming we'll get the same reward for doing the same behavior. Modeling, this is basically people we observe and imitate. I just wanted to get the word observe instead of see. Don't say see or watch or look or whatever. Put observe. And imitate. Put imitate. Don't put copy. I know it sounds like a little bit over the top, but really it would make a big difference in your essay. And then identification. We're more likely to model our behavior with people with similar characteristics. That is all I could kind of fit into this poster, unfortunately. But high status people as well are people that we identify with. But we're fine. It is fundamentally similar characteristics, and that will come in. Now, what I like that no one has really dived into too far is Bandura. So, guys, put as much as you can into the chat about Bandura, and then we'll go through it in some detail. I have put this in the AO1. Now, as you're doing this, I'll have a conversation with you because someone asked before, like, if I have an essay on classical conditioning, do I put Pavlov in the AO1 or AO3? Now, when it comes to Pavlov, I feel like you could it's going to sound conflicting now, you could kind of put it in either, because I just know that if you wrote about Pavlov, by talking about the stages of Pavlov, you would put in what is really important, which when you're talking about classical conditioning, talking about learning by association, the neutral stimulus, and conditioned stimulus, conditioned responses, all those good terminologies that is about classical conditioning. And you'd probably use Pavlov as an explanation. But you can put it as an evaluation, because you can say, well, here are the ideas. It was supported by Pavlov's own research, which showed this. Now, the danger is, though, if you're asked about, say, social learning theory, outline and evaluate social learning theory, you're getting your AO1 points for your knowledge of social learning theory itself. Bandura's research is not social learning theory as itself. It is research which supports the ideas of social learning theory. And there would be a temptation in an essay to just put loads and loads of procedural stuff about Bandura that just is not relevant to the question, like outline social learning theory. So if you had an essay on social learning theory, I would actually avoid Bandura in your AO1. There's plenty to talk about in your with mediational processes, vicarious reinforcement, modeling, and identification for you to fill out that AO1 section, because if you overdid Bandura, you might only just kind of vaguely define vicarious reinforcement, and it's just not going to hit as well. So that's a little bit of a difficult conversation. If, however, the question asks for research which supports social learning theory, you then could come in with Bandura as your AO1 and criticize the study in your AO3. So it's tricky. The main point is read the question like twice, and then once you've read it, kind of go, well, what are they wanting from this? Are they wanting just knowledge of the theory, or are they actually explicitly asking for research? And certainly you can use Bandura as research support for social learning theory itself. It'd be a great research evaluation. So yeah. Would credits will be given to Pavlov and Skinner separate evaluation points? The best to combine it out, would probably combine them, because there's a lot of other evaluations that we can use as well. Okay, so let's see what you guys have put in here for me for Bandura. I'm scrolling up, so I haven't seen your comments for a second. So Izzy Bandura, behavioral study children either watch the model be aggressive or nice to the model. They found they imitated based on which group they're in. Boys more likely to be aggressive. Yeah, weirdly, if you look at the original papers, the girls weren't as didn't identify, but the boys certainly did. And there wasn't rewards in the original study. There wasn't praise. It was just a task of imitation. Just question whether they imitated. Later studies did have rewards and a punishment, which is someone was hit with a fake golf ball, a golf stick. Okay. I think those of you who put in Bandura did a really good job on that. Thanks so much for your help. So we've got procedure. 3 to 6-year-olds observed an adult demonstrating physical, verbal aggression to a Bobo doll. Second group, no aggression. Found children exposed to aggressive model were more likely to be aggressive. So fundamentally, we have evidence of imitation, which is a fundamental concept for social learning theory, from the Berber study. We do also, in the original study, have evidence of identification from the boys who are more likely to imitate the males. But yeah, don't worry too much about, like, if you've put in about vicarious reinforcement, if you put in about identification, but don't explicitly say it was boys and not the girls, that's absolutely fine. Just, yeah, that's the way it is. Okay, let's go for, yeah, Janina, can you talk about Bandor's vicarious reinforcement study in 1965? Yes, you certainly can. And, if you get asked about, Bandor's research as an essay, Bandor's research is Bandor's research. Technically, that's literally anything he has done in this area. So, yeah, you definitely can. Okay, let's go into evaluations now, because people are talking about evaluations quite a lot in the chat. We're going to do evaluations. We're going to start with behaviorism. Just give me like one short sentence, guys, of an evaluation that you'd use, positive or negative, for behaviorism, and then I'll go through it with you and see if we picked up on everything. And if you're watching the recording, there's probably the point where you'd pause it and maybe bullet point down what you think I'm going to say. Okay, so what have we got? Not generalizable, temporal validity, probably not temporal validity. Standardized procedures, because we're researching animals, we'll probably see the same thing whether they did it 100 years ago or now. It's scientific. Knows the role of biology. Practical application in phobias. Flavor, great capital letters, got my attention there. Loose application to human behavior. Okay, I think you all got what I was after. Systematic sensitization there as well. Okay, so my first 3 evaluations. Oh yeah, considered scientific due to objectively observable stimulus response mechanisms showing cause and effect. Now, if you are writing this as an essay, I had to summarize this for a poster, of course. If you're writing this as an essay, please pick up on something that was objectively observable in the studies that you're talking about. Otherwise, it just sounds a little generic and like meh. So what was objectively observable? What was objectively observable was the pace at which the rats pressed the lever. We could very clearly see the speed at which the rats increased their lever pulling behavior. What they actually did, because this was like olden times, is they actually had like a little motor which pulled a little piece of paper behind the lever. So when the rat pressed the lever, it actually punched a little hole in the paper. And then they found out how quick it was by unreeling the paper and how quick the dots were together, like what people have to do before computers are. But that's what I'm trying to say with these evaluations. If you're saying it's scientific because observable, measurable, whatever, please, 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 please enhance that evaluation by picking something from that particular study that was observable and measurable. The same with control. If you're controlling things, what in that particular study was controlled? In Pavlov, in Skinner's study, it was the electrical voltage that ran through the bottom of the cage was controlled. If some rats had a tiny electrical voltage and some had a huge, you would have a massive difference in behavior. So pick up, if you're using a generic evaluation, some element that was unique to that study. That means you can't just pick it up and drop it in a different essay. So yeah, I hope that helps. So animal studies may not be generalizable to more complex humans. Again, say why. Well, we've got society and we've got culture, kind of thing. But society maybe slightly smaller, cultural slightly bigger, and we also have increased IQ. We generally are smarter than rats, generally. And then a lot of you said practical applications, counter conditioning for phobias, systematically sensitizing and flooding. Now, I would say 1 element of volume of saliva from me, that would work. I would say if we want to add on to this, practical application, counter conditioning for phobias, you can say, oh, this is great, it's helped lots of people, which is true, and that's a good evaluation. But I'm going to keep coming back to this. If we're talking about an approach, we want to say, is this approach true? Is it valid to say this thing is real? So what we're going to want to talk about is if the treatment works, which systematic sensitization of flooding seems to, it is good evidence that the underlying theory that it's based on is true. And that increases our confidence in the validity of the theory. So we're taking it just one level higher than just like, this is good because it helped people. Hopefully that helps. Okay, and my other evaluations are, and we've seen, I don't think I saw this one possibly. So it's often seen that using behaviorist principles can be seen as manipulative. Now, someone put token economies. That's good. Like token economies in prisons is seen as slightly manipulative, but I haven't gone that way. I've gone gambling companies often use behaviorism to try and manipulate us into doing compulsive gambling, and of course, social media as well is an issue because they make more money if we are more compulsive. Okay. So our next one as well is reductionist. Now, the fundamental point of behaviorism is all behavior, even complex behavior, can just be simplified down to stimulus response mechanisms. Maybe a chain of stimulus response mechanisms, but still stimulus response mechanisms. Now, the idea that justice, human culture, and the idea of self-sacrifice as well, it seems a little too complex to describe as just due to stimulus response mechanisms through learning by association and reinforcement, especially self-sacrifice. I don't understand how that would be learned. People often do behaviors that aren't nice for them. Okay, those are the evaluations, everyone, of behaviorism. We're now going to move in to social learning theory. So if you can, bullet point for me, what evaluations are we going to use in social learning theory? Just give me one bullet point of one evaluation each. Okay, as people are typing, I'll just do the gambling evaluation. So behaviorist principles like one particular thing is variable ratio reinforcement. You can make a gambling machine or a loot box on like a game pay out at a certain rate that makes it very, very addictive. Companies have used the principles about compulsive behavior. The rat pushing the lever is a compulsive behavior, using those things to manipulate human behavior, and it does seem a little bit problematic. Okay, got Bandora's support and research. I've not put that in just because I put it in the AO1, because in case it comes up as a question about the research, but yeah. Demand characteristics, yeah. So remember, if we're going to criticize the studies that support the overall theory, we want to just say that because we criticize the way the study has been carried out, our confidence in the research that supports the theory is undermined. Because otherwise, you're not really talking about the theory. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. Okay. Let's go. I'll reveal them bit by bit. We've got the Bobo doll study. We can say it was controlled. We're going to pick up something that was controlled to try and make sure it's shaped to the section. And the toys were in the same. So social learning theory ideas are supported. So we have a supporting evidence. Now, we can say if we're going to evaluate Bandora, or we're going to talk about social learning theory, so we can question if the study truly supports social learning theory. That sentence is important. Like, is this really good evidence to support the concept of social learning theory? We can say a problem with this, as we've said and a few people have said, low ecological validity in the real world might include watching televised violence. So we're not really watching that much adults. We never see adults being violent that often, but we do see a lot of televised violence. I know later Bandora research did look at that as well. And if you did aggression, you'll know there's a lot more stuff on that. We have issues with inferences, so mediational processes and identification and vicarious reinforcement. You can't literally see that happening. We have to assume that happening on the basis of observation. So because it's not directly observable, we might question the scientific nature of that. Oh, I've kind of come off the screen a little bit, haven't I? Nope, 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 nope. There you go. Okay. Reciprocal determinism, someone put down. I'm going to have to explain this a little bit, I think, because I know it's a comment that often people aren't as familiar with. So, first of all, we can say social learning theory is less reductionist than behaviorism because of that role of consciousness and rationality. So, any of you out there wondering when to use a reductionism argument, if the underlying theory or approach is behaviorist, then it is reductionist. It is environmentally reductionist. If the underlying theory is biological, then it is reductionist, biological reductionism, because they have very simple mechanisms, kind of like on-off switches about whether things are true or not. As soon as you add another layer, another level, another element of explanation, then you are not reductionist. You are not simplifying things to one particular cause. So they are less reductionist. There's arguments that it's good to be reductionist. It's arguments that are bad to be reductionist. You can take your own perspective. But often less reductionist explanations that include more factors are a little bit more believable. They seem more valid. They seem to apply better to how we experience the world. Obviously, reductionist explanations are easier to test, though, and provide evidence for. Yeah, it might be more believable to talk about social learning theory if we're talking about aggression. Like lots of people experience rewarding and not rewarding behavior, but we have these thoughts about whether, our annoyances should turn into actual aggression or not. And that's explained back by social learning theory. You can say soft determinism if you like. That's absolutely fine. I added this evaluation because it is Bandora's own perspective on determinism. And it is kind of an aspect of soft determinism, but it's kind of showy-offy a bit to use it. So the concept here of reciprocal determinism is one step more than the behavioral perspective, where we are shaped fundamentally by the environment. Now, they don't disagree, social learning theorists don't disagree that we shape our environments, but they also say, well, through these internal mental processes and through our responses, we actually shape our environment ourselves. So let's say, for example, we have some students and one student decides to have the motivation and works really, really hard for their test. They might then do a good test, and then the teacher then gives them positive reinforcement. They then say, well done, this was really good. They show off maybe their work in front of the class. That person has shaped their environment, but then their environment shapes them back because the teacher's response was nice. They want more of that reinforcement, so then they go and work even harder. So it's just kind of like just adding that extra element that we're not passive in this. Behaviors are just like you just experience what you experience. Behavior, social learning theorists would say it was reciprocal. But if you just want to go down soft determinism route, that's fine, because you can just say, well, they include internal mental processes, consideration about whether we actually respond, which is not as determinist. Okay. Yeah. Reciprocal determinism strength, it matches better, I guess, our experience with the world. Like, a lot of people want to believe that we have some element of free will. So generally, people would like explanations or deterministic arguments that give us that sense of free will back. When obviously when it's environmental or biological determinism, we just don't have it, and that goes so counter to like our entire justice system. Whether it's true or not is a different situation. Okay, we are going to go into the cognitive approach now. This will be the last approach we do until we take a break. I'll take a slightly longer break than usual today. I will be taking a 20-minute break. Change that. So there we go. Let's see. Just get the section up. Right, so can someone please tell me what an internal mental process actually is? This is obviously the fundamental element of the cognitive approach. What is an internal mental process? Not clear, that's why I'm here. Yeah, I wouldn't bring back attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation into a cognitive essay. I know that what I've just said is an internal mental process, but there are better examples about what cognitive psychologists actually study. Cognitive psychologists, I would say, are maybe just a little bit more scientific than social learning theorists. They're going to get one process and just really drill down and to try and find out what the structure of it is. So we've got a lot of people talking about schemas. Yeah, some people talking about memories. Okay, loads of stuff from later on the section, so I'm just going to go forward now and talk to you about it. So internal mental processes, and we're going to obviously use IMP for the rest of this poster, is how information is used or processed in the mind, and that includes all conscious and unconscious thought. Because obviously Freud inspired the cognitive psychologists to talk about the unconscious as well. So you have a whole unit on memory where you have the multi-store model, the working memory model, and you could see how much effort the cognitive psychologist used to really dive into the small mechanisms that might be at play in the process of memory. Actually, they do that for a few different mental abilities as well. So they could be an entire unit. And if you did the GCSE, you might have done some of this. You could have done a whole unit on perception and how to perceive the world. Attention, we could have had a whole unit on how we pay attention. So, but obviously, design the specification, memory was chosen. But you can see how much detail they go into of all the different lab experiments to find out the little ways that memory works. Yeah, perceptions are cool. It's very difficult, actually. Well, not very difficult, but difficult for the GCSE. Okay. Please tell me what an inference is, everyone. Please tell me what an inference is. Yeah, the breadth and depth of this topic is huge. Educated assumptions from Hosanna. Good to see you in the chat again. Assumptions based on how mental processes work. I mean, maybe we just need to change that slightly, but still good. Cognitive psychologists make conclusions based on observed behavior from Lilypad. That's good. So I'm not able to read all of them. I know some people are writing some really good stuff. I'm just seeing it scroll past my eyes very, very fast. But they're good ones. So as internal mental processes cannot be directly observed, inferences are made, kind of just necessary to do this. These are assumptions. The assumptions are about the internal mental processes, and we importantly here, on the basis of behavior. Now, obviously, the behavior will happen in a study. So on the basis of studies as well. But fundamentally, what are we basing on? Basing on the behavior in the studies. Now, behavior could be a lot of things. Behavior could be how people fill out a questionnaire. It could be how many items someone's recalled. It could be the reaction speed on a particular test. So, but we're basing our assumptions on that behavior of the participants in the study. So, for example, the structure of memory based on behavior shown by participants in lab experiments. So you give participants a list of numbers to recall, and then they call back to you, and then you add one number, and then you add one number, and you see where they tap out, and then you do that with hundreds of people, and then you can then see the behavior of when people tapped out and make an assumption, and the assumption is the capacity of short-term memory store is 7 plus or minus 2 items, because we do this with hundreds of people and they all cluster in a normal distribution around that. And we know capacity is the amount that you can hold, a fairly safe assumption, you would think. until a working memory model comes along and messes it up. Yeah. So this is what we're talking about as an inference. So good work, everyone. Now give me, and I know some people have mentioned this term before, give me what a schema is. But also in this section, I want you to be aware that in the spec, it says the role of a schema. So we can get like, what does it do for us? What's the point of it? You can also put in what's not so great about it as well, if you want. Package information, yeah. Mental process of word to make new information easier. Mental blueprint. Obviously, if you wanted examples of schemas, we could maybe bring attachment in here or psychopathology or memory. Yeah. This does come up a lot. Blueprints of information, framework of information. Got Charlie with false evidence testimony. Okay. So we want to have enough here. We can be asked directly about schemas. So, ooh, no. Oh dear. Oh dear. Okay. Schemas are mental frameworks or basic knowledge about a concept or an object. And importantly, it's built from experience. So it's hard to phrase it just as basic knowledge. It is sometimes these work together as a network to be about a particular concept. They're linked together. Now, what it's good for is it works as mental shortcuts. If we didn't have schemas, we would not be able to exist in the world as humans because the world is overwhelming. We need to realize that, that thing coming towards us is a bus and it's going to carry along the road, and we're stood to the side of the road, we're safe, and we don't have to react. All these assumptions, all these schemas just layer on each other and help us get through the world. So we couldn't live without it, without them. Problem is, these assumptions that our mind makes can often lead us away from reality, which has been picked up by a few people. Errors in memory, which would affect eyewitness testimony. Poor HM, I need to fix that. Poor mental health and stereotypes. So you could maybe go a little bit tiny. If you have the essay, don't do a deep dive into depression and schemas, but you can just give a little taste of it to show that you know what a schema is. Yeah, I mistyped that. I will fix this before I upload the digital version because I feel like I'd forget that one. Yeah, MH. I'll put MH brackets. Depression. Sweet. By the way, if anyone, like people who get these posters, if you like notice problems with it, then please let me know because it'll be really useful to fix. And even though we're going through it now. Okay, fixed. There we go. Okay, we got some good examples there. Let's move on, though. I think we smashed schemas. You guys definitely got all those elements in there between you. Just give me a one-sentence definition of what a theoretical model is, please, everyone. Butler's War of the Ghost study is awesome. Probably wouldn't bring it into here. A little bit too early to be cognitive, but it's it is true. That's cognitive explanation. It would be those schemas kind of based on him. Okay, yeah, we got some good examples there. represents mental processes and how they work. A few of you talking about flow charts. Sky input storage retrieval as an example of a basic one. I've got Alina there saying flowchart MSM. Yeah, we could go a really good example with the MSM or working memory model as an example of a theoretical model. So a flowchart representation of the steps in a mental process. For example, the multi-store model of memory. Be careful not to get this mixed up with our next one, which would often happen. They are linked in some ways because obviously computer coders would use theoretical models. The development of the cognitive psychology in the 1960s was kind of hand in hand with the development in software development. So there was a lot of crossover with ideas there. But can someone tell me what the computer model is, please? So the idea that mind is a computer, so inputs, processes, and gives out info. The mind works like a computer. Storage and encoding capacity. Sky's with a good point I don't think anyone else has made yet. Programs that imitate info processing the human mind. I think I know what you mean by that, but maybe we want to rewrite it just a little bit. Hibbo also saying programs that imitate the human mind. So yeah, most of you got the fundamental point there, which is the computer model is an analogy. So we want to put down as an analogy. It suggests the CPU of the computer is like the brain. So think about it this way, like the physicalness. If I was to like open your skull and pop out your brain, that's the physical system that makes your thoughts. The same way, if I pull out a CPU, it's the physical system that does the processing work. It's not the thoughts itself. Like if I was to say, like, where's Instagram on the CPU? He couldn't really point to it. There's a process that happens on it. In the same way, internal mental processes like attention and memory, you can't really just go, oh, there's attention in the brain. It is a process that runs on the brain. So the internal mental processes is like the software programs that run on it. So just a little bit of an addition there. But the fundamental point, which guys got, both systems receive inputs. We have our sensors, computers have keyboards and mice and cameras. Generate outputs, so computers have speakers, we have voice. But in between that, we both process information, and we seem to do that in a series of steps because those theoretical models are the series of steps to memory. What's a CPU, Hannah? If you opened up a computer and the little bit, or your phone, there would be a little chip in there, a little piece of metal that does all the thinking for the computer. It does all the information processing to output the information that's on your screen. The computer model is on the spec. You could be asked explicitly to say what the computer model is. If that's something I would probably advise most of you to do before you walk in, just remember to have a good look at what's written on the spec. You can be asked directly about the terminology that's on the spec. Can you write CPU in an exam? Yeah, of course. Until I7, nice. Okay. And our final AO1 point would be cognitive neuroscience, guys. What is cognitive neuroscience? You cannot get a 16 marker in theoretical computer models, no. You would generally expect a 16 marker to be an essay on the totality of a section. Can't guarantee that, but that's what I'd expect. But we could ask maybe an 8 marker on a smaller part. What I've noticed as well with AQA's questioning is they've kind of gone a little harder on picking little bits out and asking for an 8 marker. That's going to be tough, and it's going to be about adapting your evaluations to the particular 8 marker and seeing how the other information you've got would link to it as well. So we've got science-specific study of biological factors that can explain cognitive processes from Jojo. That's good. Modern psychological approach to Thwomp. Yeah, talking about mechanisms, brain scanning techniques. Burnt toast straight away, no PET and fMRI. I don't do predictions, unfortunately. I think there's other people who do that. Okay. We have got, for cognitive neuroscience, the development of scanning techniques like PET and fMRIs have allowed researchers to identify the neurological structures that are linked to internal mental processes. Then we could also pop on as well, this direct observation is highly scientific. I know that's kind of an evaluative point, but I put it in there anyway. So we've made, in recent years, highly sensitive PET scanners and fMRIs. So you get someone to do a task while they're in there. Maybe it's a memory task, or maybe it's a perception task, or maybe it's an attention task, and then we're seeing which parts light up. So if we see that which parts light up, we can now identify what we think are the structures that are responsible for the internal mental processes. So really useful. Okay, let's go for the evaluations for cognitive. This live stream will be up until the bio one comes up, and then I'll take it down and it'll just be available to patrons. So yeah, you got a little while. Okay, we've got machine reductionism as dehumanizing. That's good. We'll definitely talk about that. Schemas and real world application to CBT from Fomp. That's good. Is it best to bring cognitive neuroscience to a full approach? SAA1 has been told that's separate from the cognitive approach itself. No, I wouldn't necessarily agree. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but maybe I would in some ways. Is it separate? Yeah, the cognitive approach, I would say, is more theoretical, based on processes, whereas cognitive neuroscience is more biological. And in fact, I think I'm right in saying, if I can recall correctly, they've moved cognitive neuroscience out of cognitive and into bio for next year, for the new spec, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think they should have just taken it out and had it as its own additional approach, because they've taken out Wundt, so they could have moved things around and made it clear that it is kind of quite separate. But I don't think you would be in any kind of danger if you had it as a additionally part of the development of the cognitive approaches. You could, to be honest with you, if you had a 16 marker on a cognitive psychology, there's so much to talk about in your AO1. I'd be tempted to even use cognitive neuroscience as an evaluation to talk about the development of these ideas, because we talk about inferences and how we're not able to make assumptions because we can't directly observe. But cognitive neuroscience is a big step towards kind of a direct observation of some of the ideas that have not been able to be observed before. So yeah. Can I link all approaches to practical application of treatment for psychopathology as an evaluation? I think we can. And it's one of the ways, Alex, that we would, I'm not going into comparison of approaches now, but if you have a comparison of approach, each of the approaches have a treatment that's linked to them. And you can say that they disagree. You can compare them on the basis of their treatments. How they have different ideas about how to treat people. Great comparison. Okay. Yeah, it's not, no more or less people are going to get A stars and Bs and As because of the change in the specification. They'll keep the percentages basically the same. Okay, let's go in then to these evaluations, because you guys have done great for me on the evaluations. First of all, I'll reveal, although I don't know if I picked up on this, I don't know if I said it, although the chat's gone quite fast. A good thing about cognitive approach, I know the behaviorists would disagree with them, but the high control over the experiments gives cognitive psychology good scientific credibility. You think about memory and you think about the levels that they went to try and control those experiments, using the same word lists, giving people the same amount of time, using techniques to stop people doing maintenance rehearsal. Cognitive psychologists take a long time to make a lot of effort to try and make their studies as controlled as possible. We can then criticize that because there's a lab elements, but that's where we're going with it. Inferences. We've talked about inferences in the AO1. We've mentioned there's a problem with them. We could go a little deeper dive there. We can talk about the criticisms from behaviorism, but fundamentally, assumptions are assumptions and can be mistaken. A lot of assumptions made about the multi-store model of memory, and then we did a little bit more research and we realized those assumptions were incorrect, and then came up with the working memory model and types of long-term memory. So they can often be incorrect. Machine reductionism is the term that some of you guys used. Could you use the research on memory as AO3 like badly? I would say in support of your overall point about scientific credibility or control, or an issue with the research that supports it is maybe a lot of it lacks validity in the real world because it's high dependence on lab studies. Then you can maybe give the example of maybe a badly study, but don't make that your whole evaluation. Just say, well, for example, this study to support memory is problematic in that way. So yeah, too simplistic. The human brain is more complex than a CPU. Let's give some examples. We experience emotion. We experience consciousness. We don't assume a CPU has that. Although with the way AI is going, who knows for now. And our next one, don't know why I didn't copy that one over. Sorry, I'll copy that over so you can carry on type right now. Practical application. This is one of the first ones that came up. It was the role of schemas in mental health has led to development of CBT. So don't just leave it there. Like what are they doing with these schemas? Therapists are helping clients change negative thought patterns through cognitive restructuring. And then, as I mentioned before, with the other treatments, like if you're making an argument that the approach has led to a treatment, we can say, well, actually, the treatment works. CBT is highly effective. It works by altering schemas. If schemas didn't exist, then would CBT be as effective? Possibly not. So yeah, it supports the effectiveness of the treatment supports the underlying principle. And then we also have soft determinism, probably the classical soft determinists. They argue that experiences create schema that influence behavior. So there is a determining factor. There are things that lead to behavior. But because we have internal mental processes, we're able to take personal control. And you can imagine that's kind of what CBT is all about, isn't it? We have people with schemas that are automatically biased, and people with schemas kind of act automatically. But there's this kind of overriding factor, which is we are also able to think. We are to see that these schemas don't work for us, and then alter our behavior and alter our schemas. Okay, that everyone is halfway through. So we're going to take a break. Okay, so I've edited the break out this video. Just a quick reminder that if you've made it this far, to subscribe to my channel. It would mean a lot, especially being so close to 100k. And if you want the digital version of this poster, please grab it on my website or the entire revision book on Amazon. Let's get back to revision. Okay, everyone, welcome back. Let's go on to biopsychology. It's going very slow, I don't know why. There we go. It's not bad. So just a reminder for everyone joining us, we've got 208 of you still around. Probably some new people from the start. We are completing the approaches poster, and we're about halfway through. And just a reminder that I'm going to try and do the biopsychology poster as well before the exams, but not the research methods one. I do not have time in my life to make it. Well, done 6 so far, and hopefully plan to do a lot more. We should be able to get through a few paper-free ones as well, but how I'm choosing, I don't know. When's the biosec one? I mean, ideally tomorrow at 7. The reality of can I actually do it to the standard that I want to do it in that time? We'll see. Yeah, every year the amount of this is my busy time. This is really my busy time. So let's go. Yeah, I probably will be on the 20th. I'm not going to do a live. I'll just be sat on my Discord, probably putting together posters and stuff. I might actually try and make the research methods one because I do want them to exist, but I just won't have time to make it, complete it, and prepare what I have, which is my slides for the research methods one. But it does need to exist at some point. All right, let's go for biological approach then, everyone. This is our next, but by no means final section. I'm going to ask you first of all, what is included when we say biological structures? We can be asked directly about biological structures. What would be right if we're talking about biological structures? There's a few things. I guess, Jojo, it's because this falls over the half term. So genes we're going to talk about. We're not going to talk about biological. We're talking about biological structures. I mean, I suppose DNA is a structure; it is biological. But there's another section we talked about genes. So no, not really. So brain structures, neurons, synaptic transmission from Ra. I'll definitely take that. So the endocrine system, a couple of you, one or two, Olivia says the endocrine system. That is, Emma says the endocrine system. That is a biological structure, and it does affect our behavior. So biological structures, like physically, what can you point at, and how does it influence behavior? So you could physically point to the endocrine system glands. You can physically point at the brain. Technically, you can physically point at a DNA strand, but let's leave that aside. We can physically point at a synapse and a neuron. So these are all biological structures. We're saying, like, how do biological structures affect behavior? Now, it is slightly different with neurochemistry and genes because we have another section for those. So let's hold. What I want to say is biological structures include the endocrine system. These are glands released hormones. For example, the adrenal gland releases adrenaline as part of the fight or flight response. So I've got a biological structure and I've got an example of how that affects behavior. Keep in mind the questions around these are probably going to be about how does it affect behavior. It's not good enough just to say we have an endocrine system, not good enough to say it just releases hormones, not just saying an example of a hormone, but like what is it doing to behavior? So that is, fight or flight. How many hormones glands should we know? That's probably more of a question for the biopsych section because obviously there is the endocrine system in there, so we need to know it anyway. I would know a couple, maybe 3. They did a question a little while ago, which was like outline a hormone and its function, but not the adrenal the adrenal gland and adrenaline, which is kind of sneaky because obviously everyone's going to know adrenal gland and adrenaline for fight or flight. So it's like, well, hopefully you learned something else in the endocrine system. So that's all I can remember where it kind of give an indication that you need to know a couple, but you don't need to know all of the glands. I would know the glands where you can kind of tell a little bit of a story with them. Slight flight 16 marker, and not as far as I'm aware. No, I'm just going to go no. So a couple of you also mentioned the brain. If I'm going to talk about the brain and I'm going to talk about effect on behavior, what am I going to talk about when it comes to the structure of the brain? So we're talking about biological structures, the brain. What are we going to include? I'm only going to be able to cover so many of the paper-free live streams. I'm just going to have to see how those 2 weeks goes for me. yeah, I'll do my best to do as many as I can. I'll do issues and debates. I'll do schizophrenia because basically I want to do schizophrenia, and then we'll do whichever ones probably people vote for, or I might just do some random ones. Okay. Different lobes, working in Broca. Yeah, that could work. So, what I would suggest we talk about, if we're talking about the effect on behavior and the brain, localization of function as a concept, and the idea that certain parts of the brain affect behavior. So, we have the brain is the center of conscious and unconscious thought. Localization of function research has revealed parts of the brain that are specialized for tasks. The frontal lobe is rational decision making, the limbic system is emotion, and Broca's area is speech production. Because we're basically saying there are these structures and they're responsible for these things. The glands, this adrenaline, responsible for fight or flight response. The brain has these structures and they're responsible for a behavior, a process. Obviously, the ones I've chosen are just a couple. You could choose literally any structure within the brain and say, well, it seems to have an influence on behavior. I mean, it's obvious the brain has an influence on behavior, I know, but just kind of identify particular areas. Wernicke's is understanding processing. Perfect. Yes. Let's go. The next thing we can be asked about directly, which is kind of linked, is neurochemistry. So, what things am I going to talk about if I'm asked about neurochemistry? Throw some things in there for me. Chemical transmission, serotonin, neurotransmitters, not hormones, Jojo, not for this one. Concentration of neurotransmitters, the synapse that have it. Okay, some good examples of dopamine as well. OCD treatment, SSRIs. Well, definitely done on evaluations. Probably a little soon to put it into an AO1. The concept of synaptic transmission, but again, we're going to go into massive details. So again, we'll probably be thinking in this section, biological approach, the effect of neurochemistry on behavior. So we're thinking about, well, behavior is now like it is physically observable behavior, but the sense emotions is kind of still behavior, still like something that's happening within someone. Just isn't observable behavior or objectively observable. Okay. So neurochemistry. Obviously, we're talking about neurotransmitters, and they influence behavior because when they're released at synapses, they enable communication between neurons. And this communication is this big web of neurons all communicating with each other, allows these processes to happen. So you've got serotonin, which is linked to well-being and happiness. You've got dopamine, which is linked to pleasure. We've got noradrenaline, which is linked to attention. We've got glutamate, which is learning and memory. You don't need to remember all those, but if we're talking about neurochemistry, one a couple of those in our conversation. But fundamentally, they enable behaviors because they enable the transmission to work. This video will be available after live for about 24 hours. And next up, we have genes. If you ask directly about genes, what we're going to talk about, there's a lot in each section. You've probably noticed on this poster, there's a lot of bullet points in the AO1. That's because the specification for approaches is quite precise about knowing certain concepts, and you can be asked directly about any of it. Does all of this need to be in an essay for AO1 for the biological approach? No, not really. It's about breadth and depth. You can talk about a lot of things in not so much depth, or something in a lot more depth. Although it's about a balance between those, though. So don't go absolutely wild on genes, for example, and just not even mention the brain. Okay, so we've got some example genes there: genotypes, phenotype, cert genes, genes for aggression. Yeah, you can mention competence cert. Yeah. Okay, let's see what we've got. So if we're talking just about genes, we're going to say that genes influence how the brain neurons form. So I think genes are a little tricky because it's not just because you have the gene, you behave in a certain way. All of this biological stuff is linked together. I think I've sometimes forgotten. It's not just that you've got the gene, it's because these genes have jobs, these genes have codes, and that makes physical changes either in the neuronal system or across the brain larger and structurally, or in the endocrine system. These genes code for certain things. So we see, and of course that's the genotype, and then the phenotype is the physical expression of the genotype. Now, what I've written here is really important. If we're talking about genotypes, phenotypes, I would avoid talking about, if possible, a physical change like eye color or something like that. I would talk about a behavior. So we might have a gene or a set of genes that predisposes for aggression. So the DNA is there's a code, is the genotype, and the actual being aggressive itself is the phenotype. Because remember, we're talking about biological approach as it explains behavior, not as it explains biological structures, like biological, just the body itself. So just that slight little, someone put the moa gene. A slight little consideration here. We're talking about genes. Maybe try and focus it on behavior and genes, not genes and something else. So phenotypes is physical expression of a genotype, so the being aggressive. The SERT gene has been associated with the development of OCD. This genetic code influences serotonin transport and has been linked to compulsion. So we don't need to go into a massive detail. I know you know about OCD and genes. We just need that little sentence as an example. The biological approach could come up as a 16 marker as a whole, but you could be asked shorter questions on these individual concepts. Okay, and the last thing we could talk about is evolution and behavior. So tell me what we mean by evolution and behavior in biological psychology. Would I include this in an essay? Probably not, because of all the other things that I've talked about. Would be enough breadth. So give me some information about what it means that behavior is linked to evolution. Explicitly behavior. Can someone give me some behaviors that clearly are? At least first one in there with desirable characteristics are passed down for survival advantage is a great sentence. Some traits are selected for, so become more common in general in the population. That's really good. Yeah, all this AO1, yeah, it is really because we can be asked about it directly. Gripping reflex in babies, that's a good one. Adaptive, I don't know, saying metrograss. Adaptive characteristics are genetically transmitted to offspring's behaviors. Could include Bowlby's theory of attachment as being innate and adaptive. That is great. That is great. Okay, let's see what I've got here. So, innate behaviors that provide survival advantages are selected for and passed down to the next generation of the species. That's the basic principle of how evolution works and natural selection, I guess. So a good example, I've given two. If you do aggression, it makes total sense to talk about male aggression would have been useful in evolutionary history for hunting, protecting families, and competing for mates. So those males who showed no aggression at all in like a hunter-gatherer society might have struggled to pass down its genes, either because it wasn't able to catch food, because it didn't been shown for aggression, either because their resources were stolen because they weren't able to protect their families, or because they didn't get a mate to begin with because they just weren't seen as particularly capable in that type of society. That might be a gross misunderstanding of what hunter-gatherer societies were like, but that's the theory. Probably a better one is Bowlby's evolutionary explanation of monotrophy. The idea is babies and their caregivers are both biologically primed to show caregiving behavior or to do behaviors that elicit caregiving behavior. You've got a baby that doesn't really do the behaviors that you expect. It doesn't trigger the behaviors in the mother, so the baby doesn't get the care it needs. Baby's more likely to die. The mothers don't feel the biological need to provide care to babies. Well, in that case, the babies might not get enough care. Again, they might not survive. In today's society, maybe it's a little different. Maybe people would survive anyway. Very few people die in childhood. But throughout all of human history, getting through childhood has been very difficult up until the modern age. So that's a very strong evolutionary pressure to behave in certain ways. We've got some there on the relationship stuff as well, which is great examples. Yeah, sexual jealousy also works. So yeah, some great examples there from evolutionary behavior. So again, that could be quite a few marks that you could have to put together. A question on evolution would be a bit tricky as well. Yeah, everyone subscribed as well. I don't know how close I am now to 90k, but I'm getting there. Okay. I think we're good. We're going to go now into evaluations, everyone. So as we did previously, you just throw down the evaluations of what you're going to do, and then I'll work through the ones that I've got. So give me a little bit of a bullet point. Yeah, I don't think I'll get to 90k before this this exam season ends, but maybe I'll get there early next year. Yeah, biological reductionism is a good one. Twin studies will come to. fMRIs is good. Yeah, we can link that. We need to have a look, dive into a cognitive bit, but yeah, totally right. Biological determinism as well as reductionism. Scientific nature, certainly. Okay. Development SSRIs, may, and a few other ones as well. Good. Okay, so how have I written these out? So I've gone for empirical. So the evidence that we get from biological theories are backed up by a range of empirical studies using objective measurements. And yeah, fMRIs are a great example of a device that is very clear in what it shows. There's no, we get someone to do a task and we see the part of the brain light up directly. Also a blood test, if we're talking about levels of hormones, we can do a very precise measurement of the level of hormones. Neurotransmitter levels are actually a little more difficult to measure directly, but there are ways of doing it, like tapping spinal fluid and stuff like that, and looking for biomarkers. So the evidence for biological theories are a little bit more precise. Some of you mentioned twin studies. So we've got the concordance rate. Be careful about how we talk about concordance rate. This often gets messed up. Anyone can be measured for concordance. You and any random person in society can be measured for concordance. The concordance means the likelihood of one person to have something if another person has it. So the concordance rate across the population for OCD is 1%. The concordance rate between, then we can look down different family members and see the closer related the concordance rate goes up. So concordance rate aren't just about monozygotic and dizygotic twins. So we do concordance studies and we find out that the concordance rate of monozygotic twins is 68% compared to the concordance rate of 31% dizygotic. I need to fix that as well. Let me fix that for the post. There we go. There we go. So that difference is so large, we would assume that there's a biological element there. Although, of course, you can go into a deeper dive about the problematic use of twin studies in biological research, especially if we're talking explicitly about genes. I kind of like, maybe it's positive, maybe it's negative, maybe it's just a point to make, depends how you phrase it, is if we have just a biological explanation, these tend not to be, and you can follow this on, of course, from the correlation or concordance rate study. The biological explanations tend not to be a complete explanation for almost any disorder. So, for example, the genetic vulnerabilities, the genotype, might act as a diaphysis, but they often need an environmental trauma, like a stressor for the disorder, or maybe a complex behavior to come about. And then you've got the MOA gene from regression. You can have the MOA gene, but it seems to be that you need to also have that history of childhood trauma as well. Would I talk about? No, I wouldn't talk about if it was the biological approach. I wouldn't talk about the use of family adoption studies as part of the A1 really, because there's so much to talk about in the BioWay 1. I would possibly save it for evaluation, because you can get a little lost on like, well, what is the biological approach itself, and then just a deep dive on just like what twins are. Remember, the biological approach is using biology to explain behavior. So I try and keep it a little bit tight on that. Yeah, I fixed it on the digital file, but it won't change on the screen. Okay, and a lot of you talked about practical applications and drug therapies and SSRIs. Again, we're going to take the same approach as previously. So, drug therapies are being developed for mental health conditions, and the drugs are based on the assumption that there's a biological imbalance. So, SSRIs, there's a imbalance in serotonin. As these treatments are successful, and they are very successful at reducing symptoms at least, this suggests that mental health conditions have a link to neurochemical processes. Bio does have animal studies, but it's not really something I'm going to go down on because, there's not as animal studies as the behaviorist approach. So I'm not going to focus on that. These are simplified notes, as in like I'm trying to get an entire unit on one sheet of A3. You could summarize this even more. I do wonder if you could get like an entire, you could get an entire like paper onto one sheet of A3, or maybe even one sheet of A4 if you just did the key terms and little arrows. So yeah, I'm trying to be as concise as I can be, but fit it all onto one sheet of A3. But yeah, you can certainly do it more. Biological determinism. So we can argue that actions, if you're taking a biodeterminist approach, we're saying that they're predictable due to biological processes. Yeah, I didn't want to do any more than 5 evaluation points, Alex. So yeah, you can add reductionism. That's fine. Yeah, we're trying to find the balance, Slimy, to go like what's simplified and so much that you can see it in front of you, but what's not so simplified that you're not really sure what you're talking about. So we can go into, this is the element as well. I want to show you at least a little bit, not that you just got a generic evaluation, but how we're going to just tweak this a little bit to make it sound good, to make it sound adapted for that question. So it's good enough to say that, determinism means actions are predetermined. But in this case, we've got problems if we're going to say that criminals have certain genes because our entire legal system is based on the idea of free will and responsibility. And we've also got a problem with if we say that mental health disorders are biologically determined, you're not in control of your biology, so you might feel disempowered to make a change in comparison to CBT, where it's all about trying to make people feel empowered to make their own changes. Yeah, I'm not doing comparisons in this video, but the evaluations are often matched up to each other. Okay, we are now on to our second to last section, which is psychodynamic. Let's go with you're welcome, Jonathan. You're welcome, Jonathan. This is going to be a relatively long couple of hours for you guys. I appreciate that, and me as well, but we'll get through it. What is the 3 parts of the mind? That would be a little confusing. Sana, I either sell this poster, I think it's £2 on the bottom of this video, you should be able to see a link to it, or you can sign up to a Patreon and get all the stuff I make, which includes this poster and a bunch of other stuff. Yeah, a bunch of ego and id ego, super ego, and that's not what I'm after in here, but I can totally see why. That's the tripartite structure of personality. If we're going to say the psyche, the mind, what's it made up of? It's made of 3 parts. The conscious, the thoughts we're aware of, the preconscious, what we're not currently aware of but can be, and the unconscious, the thoughts, desires, and memories that we can't access in our awareness, but we would argue that it influences our behaviors and our feelings, mostly through anxiety. So yeah, there's a little bit of confusion about the two. I think Freud didn't necessarily think both were going on at the same time. I know he changed his minds a lot over his career, but if we're talking about the mind, we can make a distinction between those things. Yes, they're the same thing. Okay, let's go with now, and a bunch of you have done it, the tripartite structure of personality. You have already told me the id, ego, and superego. So please give me a definition as best you can of the id, please. What is the id? Okay, we have pleasure principle. People saying pleasure seeking. Instant gratification. Excellent. Okay, so we might want to point out, oh, actually, no, I won't reveal that yet. The id is, yes, the pleasure principles. Pleasure is present from birth, and it is satisfying personal needs and desires. Give me the ego as well now, then, please. The ego. Tell me the dates as well. When does the ego develop? So Poppy going in there with an Ella with the ego mediator between the id and superego at the same time. A little late there with people saying 3 to 5. That is not the ego. Okay, so we have got the ego as a reality principle. Around 18 months, obviously varies a little bit, but 18 months is the date that we've got. And then, yeah, acts rationally as a mediator between the id and the superego. And of course, I'm going to ask you now, tell me about the superego. What is it? Got morality principle. Yeah, internalizes moral standards is good by Jonathan. Excellent. Okay. I'll reveal all of this now. So yeah, we've got a tripartite structure of personality, id, ego, and I'll explain both of those. The superego, or the morality principle, 3 to 5 years, uses guilt when actions don't match our strict standards. So we obviously develop kind of through socialization, and we learn from our peers and our family what is expected of us, and if we're acting against what our society suggests is moral, we'll feel guilt, and that alter our behavior. It's a mean one, superego, because sometimes people do like the devil for the id and the angel for the superego, but the ego is like the superego is mean, just constantly making you feel guilt for things that maybe you don't need to feel guilty for. Let's go now through defense mechanisms. First of all, what are defense mechanisms? The superego being conscious, unconscious. There's different perspectives on that. There's little diagrams which show some are partly conscious and partly unconscious. I'd generally assume it's pretty unconscious. Slightly conscious, but mostly unconscious. Prevent harm. Got denial, repression, displacement as the ones. Yeah, ways of protecting the conscious mind from trauma. I like that. Okay, so I've put strategies by the unconscious mind to manage conflicts and reduce anxiety. But then can you come in with denial, please? What is denial? This is not, my friends, a river in Egypt. Okay, Ella in there with refusal to accept reality is probably the first one. Yeah. Not accepting the reality. Let's go for displacement. What is displacement? So we'll just put kicking the cat. Ouch. Okay. Yeah, moving negative feelings, but actually, not necessarily negative feelings. Someone could have like intense positive feelings to someone, but not actually be able to express it on them. So they can displace positive emotions, but yeah, a strong emotion, move from the source of that emotion to a target, usually, a weaker target or a more accessible target. And then finally, what is repression, everyone? What's repression? Everybody's typing. So pushing emotions down and ignoring, shoving it deep inside is forgetting a traumatic memory for, putting it into the unconscious. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, we'll all probably got a good one there. Burying unpleasant memories you can't address into the unconscious, making them, inaccessible. So, defense mechanisms, that's our definition. That are 3 different: denial, displacement, repression. There are more than that, but those are the ones that we can be asked directly to define by AQA. No, Jojo, I do not think they can ask a 16 marker on just those things. They could, I imagine, ask a shorter question on these sections, though. Let's go to psychosexual stages. What, everybody, is the first psychosexual stage, and where is pleasure coming from? So, psychosexual stages is the conflicts that must be resolved, or we result in fixation. Yes. Okay, oral mouth, easy enough. This is about breastfeeding, isn't it? What is the second stage of psychosexual stages, and where is pleasure coming from or doing? Well, that's hilarious. Okay, Emma, a slightly more serious answer. Yeah, 1 to 3 years, expelling or withholding feces. And this is the bit where we have the anal retentive issue. Okay, what happens in the phallic stage? What happens to boys in the phallic stage? Yeah, this is always always fun to teach this bit. Oedipus complex, yeah. So we have an element where Freud would argue that they would get sexual desire for their mother. And also Rosie has put down castration anxiety. The electrocomplex is interesting. I know a couple of you put that down. Interestingly, Freud doesn't argue that. He disagreed with it, but it was Jung, another psychodynamic researcher. But there's more psychodynamic researchers than just Freud, so you can put down electrocomplex as well. But maybe you might want to point out that it was Jung rather than Freud. Okay, what is the next stage? What's after the phallic stage? You can definitely put electro down, but it is Jung. Okay, latency. Good. So then we're going to say energy is dispersed across the body in the latency stage. And the final stage, what age and what is going on? Oscar always plays long games. That's pretty good. Yeah, 12 plus old age princes like pickles. They certainly do. Okay, and then we're in the adults stage there. Okay, that is the psychosexual stages kind of written up. There's a lot of information there in that area 1 for the psychodynamic approach. A lot going on. Okay, let's go to the evaluations now. Evaluations for Freud. Give me some strengths first. It's easy to go and be mean about Freud. Give me some strengths. Yeah, we can talk about Little Hands as a piece of research. I have read Little Hands, though, the actual original paper, and it's so weird. So weird. And the fact that, like, Little Hands' parents were, like, fans of Freud, so they were writing to Freud about what's going on with Little Hands, and I'm like, this is so biased. They're just looking for things or almost making situations happen that they already know that, like, Freud thinks. So, yeah. Yeah, you're gonna go read it. Maybe read it in the summer. It's like it's a bit of a read. It's worth it, but like didn't make me feel confident in the research. Okay. So, influential theories. I think that's pretty where we're going to go with the advantages is influential theories. I do have another positive that I'll reveal right at the end, actually. So I've got significant influence. So the influence I would probably point to in, I think, modern theories, if Bowlby can be considered modern, is Bowlby was kind of a psychodynamic researcher in his theoretical perspectives. So obviously Freud was basically the first psychologist to really do a deep dive into the argument that early childhood experiences could affect adult life. And then you can see how that would have affected Bowlby's perspective. Also, his perspective on the unconscious mind is kind of like being repackaged by cognitive psychologists, but cognitive psychologists accept that there's an unconscious mind, and that was shaped by Freud's work as well. So, trying to find positives is relatively difficult sometimes, especially with the problems of his work, but that's certainly the case that other psychologists have taken his ideas and it's still part of modern psychology. We've also got face validity. Like that means it just kind of sometimes makes sense. Like people with kids would often say that boys have a stronger attachment to their mothers. It's clear that early trauma can influence anxiety levels. And even when you're with your friends, you can be like, "Oh, they're just in denial," or "Oh, you can see someone displacing like their emotions on someone else." It makes logical sense. It looks like some of these ideas are true. Some of them not, but some of them true. Let's go some criticisms, guys. Give me some criticisms now. Yeah, ideas are untestable, unfalsifiable. Yeah, don't put straight up weird. I think that would be a great idea. Empirical evidence, case studies and inferences, and return take that work. Can't do them directly. Okay, yeah, I'll come in here. Led to therapy is something I will actually put into as positive. So yeah, lack scientific credibility, and we could also potentially argue is biased. You can maybe do a double level here. If you've got a little evaluation about Little Hands, you could then come in and then pull it apart. So Freud's evidence is mostly case studies of his clients, and he was the one who interpreted their memories, introspections, and dreams. And of course, there's temptation. If it's your theory and you're having to interpret a dream, to interpret those dreams in such a way as to support your own ideas. So not necessarily. Another element, he designed his ideas in a way that they couldn't really be tested or they couldn't be shown to be wrong, like id, ego, and superego. I don't know how many of you do forensics, but Freud's ideas on criminality, like almost no matter what the criminal is, it's explained by the superego. So there's no real way to test the impact of the superego in that way. And then finally, for practical applications, we do have a piece of research by Demat, which is a meta-analysis of psychodynamic therapy. And there are a lot of people who claim to have been treated by psychoanalysis. So it could be that the psychodynamic ideas, have some validity because psychodynamics is such a popular treatment option. Okay. So you might want to pause that if you're catching up on the record. I'm going to go now to our final section. Our final section is humanistic psychology. Okay. Let's go with some basic knowledge of humanism. What's the main differences between humanism and other approaches? I think if you got a comparison essay with humanism, you'll be absolutely very happy. Neri is straight in there with free will. It's holistic as well. We've got sort of against reductionist perspectives. Let's just dive into those two first, because that's where I want to start off with. Those, so we've gone some more precise concepts from here. So we start off, what makes them different? They argue human behavior is too complex to study using reductionist scientific methods, disagreeing with basically everyone else, maybe not Freud, but basically everyone else. So they say a holistic method is far better, like a case study, because maybe that's a more valid expression of human behavior. We've also got free will. So the only perspective really that has a fully free will assumption. So external causes don't set our behaviors. Instead, we shape our own lives via the conscious decision making that we do. Okay. Next up, I want to talk about what is self-actualization and what is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So what is self-actualization? It's idiographic this area. So self-actualization, reaching one's full potential through personal growth. I mean, that's good. Rosie, you got something very similar as well. Okay, give me the hierarchy then. Rosie, give me the hierarchy. Physiological, safety, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. Peak human experience is a good phrase to use as well. That's good. So just a quick note on this as well, because we'll go into some more detail. Humanistic psychology focuses on personal growth, not mental illness. So personal growth includes the concept of us getting to self-actualize. This is the highest level of psychological development. We realize our full potential and we perform at our best. In order to get there, as you've pointed out with your Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's the argument that we need to have our foundational needs met first before we can get self-actualization. So we start with the most basic: physiological, safety, love and belonging, esteem, and then finally self-actualization. Okay, people are already going to go a little ahead of me. You can guess what's coming next. Yeah, give me what congruence is, please, everyone. I probably wouldn't bring in Jehoda's criteria for ideal mental health in here. Maybe an evaluation. There's a lot of other things to talk about. So your ideal self matching your real self. Interestingly, the real self isn't what we're after here. There are three selves according to humanism. I actually think in my new videos, I think I took out real self because it was very confusing. The real self is fundamentally unknowable because of our biases and our assumptions. We only have a ideal self and a perceived self. So yeah, it's a little different there than what you guys said. So congruence, essential for self-actualization, and it's how well the perceived self. So when we imagine who we are to be, it's that self. We can't really see ourselves as we really are because of these assumptions and biases, but we can have a sense of who we are. And an ideal self, the one that we want. No, the perceived self is not the actual self. There is potentially an actual self out there, but according to humans, it's just fundamentally unknowable. Other people can't see our actual self as well because they just see the version of us that they're biased to see. So this is why we can change the perceived self, because it's not the actual self. We can change very quickly how we see ourselves without actually having to change ourselves. I would not say actual. I would say perceived. Yeah, the gap between the perceived self and the ideal self is is called incongruence. So yeah, just keep in mind, like, if the actual self was true, you'd actually have to change something about yourself in order to change. Whereas perceived self, if you make someone feel better about themselves, about who they are, you have changed the perceived self without actually changing anything about who they are. So enhancing the perceived self or having a more realistic idea self can help someone achieve congruence. Okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah, I took actual self out of the video. I think the new one that I made, I had in my old one, but I just thought it made it too confusing because congruence is about the gap between perceived and ideal. And finally, everyone, tell me about Roger's client-centered therapy. Unconditional positive regard. That's a good concept to put in here. Patient and scientist is ready for this bit. Assessing the client holistically is good. Reducing congruence. Yeah. Aims to create unconditional positive regard and remove conditions of worth that center around a particular concept. That's good. Non-directive therapy. That's a good phrase. I maybe should have used that phrase myself. Non-directive therapy. I've explained it, but not used that term. Okay. Oops. They reveal the evaluations there. So Carl Rogers' client-centered therapy emphasizes present and future, not the past. Do you think about Freud? Freud is a very different perspective. It's all about the past. The humanistic psychology is all about the present and the future. The therapist's job is to provide unconditional positive regard to help the client achieve congruence. That unconditional positive regard they might not be getting elsewhere. Yeah, the comment section is probably one of the best things about these videos, I think. The client is seen as the expert, and the therapist simply helps them resolve their own issues. So a very different perspective compared to CBT and Freudian psychodynamics. Okay, so non-directive therapy is basically that perspective. The client is seen as an expert, so they're not told what to do. They're helped to find their solutions to their own issues. Okay, and then let's just do the evaluations all in one go, everyone, for humanism. Give me, everyone, at least one positive or one negative, and I'll talk you through them. Okay, Rosie's in there. Holistic and free will. Hard to apply to collectivist cultures. A person, that's good. Culture bias, yeah, we'll definitely know that. What? Practical applications is good as well. Can't create non-effective laws. I didn't put that one down, but that's good. Okay, we've got some really good ones. I think you've got all of mine, I think. I think you've got all of mine. I'll have a couple of extras. Okay, so we have holistic. So the others would not be argued to be holistic. There are issues with holism, but if we're saying like what is a true reflection of someone's psychology, to include a lot of factors, would be holistic. So it might be more valid in capturing the complexity of human existence. Other reductionist explanations often face criticism for overlooking multiple contributing factors, which certainly isn't the case with humanism. Oh, good, Rosie. Thanks for that. Face validity. Again, this is the only approach that argues that we fundamentally have free will. I know there's soft determinism, but to say we fundamentally have free will. Now, we all experience a sense of autonomy and self-direction, so it matches our experience of the world. Is that an illusion? Maybe. I don't know. But at least it matches what we feel. Practical application, we can talk about, I know if you do sport or you do business, you will learn about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it's been applied to sport and business, so you can enhance people's physical performance and employee satisfaction by working on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. A lot of you coming in with culturally biased, that's totally right. Developed in the 1960s America, it may be culturally biased towards a Western individualistic ideal. So, this is all American perspective, can maybe hippie times as well. So to emphasize just someone's personal success through self-actualization might sound like it makes sense to us because we're in an individualistic culture. But if you grew up in a collectivist culture where it's about the group, then maybe sacrificing your own needs to help your family is kind of how you've been raised and makes more sense to you. And to say that isn't a good way to live your life is maybe problematic. And the other thing, we cannot say this is a scientific perspective. It doesn't really want to be, but this use of non-experimental techniques means we don't have empirical evidence for the claims made by humanistic psychologists. And concepts like self-actualization, a little bit like the superego, it's not really defined in such a way that we can actually test if someone is self-actualized. So a person goes, self-actualization isn't objective, so hard to measure. There's been loads and loads and loads and loads of evaluations that have popped up in the chat, which are really good, so people can have a little read through those as well. So that, everyone, is the completed poster. So yeah, I have done as well a comparison poster. You can see that on the screen next to me. But yeah, I'm not going to go through the comparisons as a video. I've just got this one. So I hope that revision video was really useful for you. Just a reminder, I'm going to be doing some more of these over the course of the year, so do subscribe if you haven't already. And of course, you can get this digital version over on my website. I'll see you in the next one.